Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for the September version of Night with the Experts. This is a monthly program put on by the Chicago-based Nuclear Energy Information Service. We're a 43-year-old safe energy anti-nuclear organization. And at these programs, what we attempt to do is bring experts from around the country on nuclear power issues, nuclear waste, renewable energy, sometimes nuclear weapons, climate change, bring them in for an hour and a half of conversation with you, the participants who show up. So the way we operate is our guest will have a period of time at the beginning here to make some opening remarks. And then I'll turn the meeting over to my colleague and board member, Jan Budart, who will moderate a session where you will have an opportunity to ask questions or engage in discussion, both with the speaker and perhaps with each other as well. I'm really pleased tonight to let you know that we have a semi-legendary person with us, Stephanie Cooke, who has been a longtime writer on nuclear issues and has authored a book, which you'll hear about in a few minutes, has agreed to join us, and we'll be talking about a number of topics. She specifically wanted to address wasteful congressional spending, which I know is redundant, but I'm sure she'll do her best there. So on that note, a couple of announcements. Next month, the last Thursday of the month is October 31st, Halloween. And we decided that as scary as nuclear power is, we decided we're not going to do the Night with the Experts on the 31st. We're moving it a week earlier. So in October, you'll join us on October 27th, which is a Thursday at 7 o'clock Central Time. And we're going to have Justin Noble, another author, who has written a book recently called Petroleum 238. And later on in the evening, I'm sure Jan Budart will tell you a little bit about that. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. We really welcome your participation, and we hope you have a good time with us. I'll now turn it over to my colleague and friend and board member, Jan Budart.
Thank you very much. I hope you all understand I have got some sort of a respiratory, I don't know what, and I will do my best not to make it interfere with this program tonight, but I don't guarantee. So we're having Stephanie Cooke. I've known about her for a long time because she wrote a wonderful book called In Mortal Hands, meaning to my mind that human beings have taken on an immortal source of power, and it is a very good book. I read it a long time ago and have reread it recently. So I'd like to just turn this over to Stephanie to introduce herself in any way that she wants, and to go ahead and make some remarks that will be lead to our discussion. Thank you. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, David. And thank you, every single one of you, for attending. I'm really honored and flattered, actually, to be talking to this group. When Jan and David approached me, I was a little perplexed because the book was published about 15 years ago, before Fukushima. And actually, true confessions of a first-time author, when I began writing the book in the late 90s, or began researching for it, I really was conceiving of this as a project to tell a history of an industry that was going the way of the dodo bird. I actually kind of felt like it was coming to an end because it just had that feeling about it. And little did I know that as I got writing and, researching, and I was moving from England back to the States and whatnot, along comes GNEP under George Bush. And I was like, what is this about? And then I had to, as things went on, and Obama was elected, and I could see that they were going to continue pushing nuclear, I was really perplexed. And I was trying to ask myself, what is wrong with this picture and why is this happening? And I've kind of been asking myself this question ever since. And now, maybe more than ever, since the since the push for nuclear power has gained kind of almost universal acceptance, at least across our political spectrum in the United States, and as far as I can see in Canada, the same is true. In England and France, there's not much visible anti-nuclear push. So it's all really, you know, and I have talked to many people over the last several years about it, asking, you know, what is it? What is it? Is it social media? Is it amplifying this thing? But the fact that sort of nobody is questioning it, particularly in our Congress, as they approve bills for billions and billions of dollars of subsidies. And before that, states like Illinois and Ohio and various other states. And I just don't get it. I don't understand, you know, when I started I started covering the industry in 1980, thereby I'm dating myself. But in 1980, at that time, there was a lot of opposition in Congress, and really intelligent opposition in, you know, people like Mo Udall, who had staff members that were MIT educated nuclear physicists. And you don't have that. You don't have that kind of educated staff in Congress anymore. I mean, they're plenty smart, but I don't know how many, you know, nuclear physicists there are in the halls of Congress these days. And so the people that were my early sources, who are really educated and intelligent about nuclear power, and who kind of slowly over the years educated me about nuclear power, they're not around, those kind of voices. And that really worries me. I don't know how this is all going to play out, but so I'm kind of starting from that basis. Like, why can't we get, I mean, even Ed Markey has gone silent about nuclear power. Who, you know, who used to be, for those of you who might not be American citizens, he was one of the loudest voices against nuclear energy. And also I should add that when I started, I was not always an anti-nuclear person. I don't even like to class myself as anti-nuclear, because I was so conditioned to being a reporter and a journalist that had to be kind of unbiased as I could be. Of course, when I wrote the book, I tried to be as balanced as I could, but I told them that, I'm sorry, but this is going to be, you know, basically a negative. This is my view about nuclear energy and why I think it's so dangerous, and why I don't think it's a good solution for the energy crisis or the climate crisis. And so I'm kind of find myself on that side of the line, but I had to, as I edited Nuclear Intelligence Weekly for 15 years, I had to be careful that I was as balanced as I could be. And I know many people in the industry who I have respect for, and so on and so forth. But so there's this question that kind of is overhanging me about why is so much money being devoted to this, and why is Biden, for example, passing legislation to streamline an agency that is already notoriously lax in its approach to safety, at least in my opinion. Or at least from what I've seen in the past. So there's those questions, and I really look forward to hearing people in our audience and their thoughts about this. To do a quick recap, since say the year 2000, my book came out in 2009. But you know, you had GNEP, where you had maybe, say, roughly 30 reactor projects proposed, out of which we know only 2 were ever built. And we had Watts Bar 2 was completed. So we got 3 gigawatts of power since the year 2000. And between the year 2000 and for those 3 projects, and including also the failed project in South Carolina, which collapsed the year Westinghouse went bankrupt for maybe the 2nd or 3rd time in its history. For those 3 projects, I calculated that, or 4 projects, I should say, Vogtle, Summer, and Watts Bar, that we have a total amount of money of, say, 50 billion has been spent, including some money for these 25 or 6 other reactors that never got built. So maybe between the utilities and the government and ratepayers, and taxpayers, we spent about $50 billion as a nation. And for that amount of money, we got 3 gigawatts of power. And that 50 billion, I think, is a conservative number. That does not include all the money that's since been spent on small modular reactors, advanced fuels, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more money going into it, and also corruption, as I'm sure you're all aware, with people behind bars as we speak for their sins. And so we've got all that going on. And now on to boot, we added to the subsidy game is the latest invention, maybe, or business plan that the nuclear utilities are cooking up, which is to dedicate a portion of their to reopen reactors or take existing reactors and tie them up to AI plants. The latest one is, of course, you've all read TMI. I always forget, is it 1 or 2 that is being reopened after 5 years, or that's the plan. And they're saying it's, there's very little information about how this is going to be financed, but they're calling it a $1.6 billion plan, and they're talking about reopening it by 2028. I mean, I think that's something we should all discuss tonight, this thing about tying up nuclear power plants to AI plants. For one thing, it isn't clear, there's a lot of hype about the AI industry and how much energy period they're going to need. So there's that question. But on the nuclear side of this is the question of, first of all, can you lop off some of your capacity behind the grid and do it in a way that FERC approves and that doesn't upset the way that the transmission and the delivery system works. And in that sense, it's kind of interesting because you have Exelon together with one other utility, I've forgotten which one, which is actually has sent a complaint and is litigating against its spin-off company, Constellation, for the deal that was done between Amazon and Talon Energy in March. In other words, well, I mean, potentially against Constellation. I'm not getting this really straight, and I don't know all the details because I'm actually retired now, so I'm not on top of the news as I once was. But point is that Exelon now doesn't like the fact that these deals are happening because they see it as, we're going to end up paying the bulk for the transmission lines, and these guys are still going to have access to transmission, but they're closing off some of the electricity they produce by keeping it behind the bar, if you will. And so the question is can they do this? Can they get away with this? And if they are and if they're effectively raising costs for ratepayers, why should they be getting subsidies on top of it? Right? Like, they're getting subsidies and they're getting paid extra money by these very well-funded AI companies to supply electricity to them. So there are all these questions. Goldman Sachs apparently estimates that 47 gigawatts of new capacity is needed to meet the AI demand between now and 2030. That's quite a lot if you think that some of it's going to go to nuclear. But how this gets configured and whether it's actually going to happen. I mean, we have some people in the audience that I think would be, I hope they could comment. Dave Lockbaum, I see, is here, about how this actually works. I mean, there are questions like, does the NRC have the capacity to approve the reopening of 3 Mile Island? Does, they have allowed the reopening of Palisades, and now Palisades apparently has all these problems with its steam generators. How can you take a plant that's been closed for 5 years and safely reopen it to supply electricity to one firm? And are you going to take some of that capacity and supply it to the grid? And if you are, how is the deal going to work? How much is it really going to cost to get this plant up and running? How fast can NRC approve it? I mean, it sounds to me like it's just loaded with problems, front loaded with problems. So I would be really, really interested to hear comments about that issue. There's also stuff like surface and groundwater permits that have to be looked at. And so this seems to be the latest idea for salvaging the nuclear industry. And I would like to know why no one in Congress isn't looking at this harder and looking at the timelines of nuclear energy. And also, for example, questioning how much money they've put into advanced reactors and small reactors. What are the prospects for serious capacity growth there, serious contribution to climate change? I mean, why isn't anyone in Congress asking this question? And why aren't there more articles in the newspaper and in magazines and in all sorts of different media forms actually looking at this and saying, hang on a minute, what are we doing here? You know, could we look at this a little more carefully? The only answer I get that is halfway, I would say reasonable, is, oh, well, we're going to still need a lot of energy past 2050. And by then, all of this is going to be working just fine. But as an industry source said to me when I told him about DOE's plan to triple nuclear energy by the year 2050, he said, you know, what are they smoking at DOE? He didn't believe it. And he said, I would have thought, doesn't anyone think that by then, he meant, doesn't anyone within the industry think that by then there's going to be better solutions for electricity production? So these are people in the industry saying that, but no one in Congress is saying that. No one seems to be, you know, looking at this whole question in an intelligent way. Nuclear energy now has this cachet like it had in the 50s. And I'm kind of blown away by this because we've been through so much since the 1950s. One of the reasons, as Jan points out frequently, and she's absolutely right, is that people like Ernie Moniz, the former energy secretary, but many others believe that we need a viable civilian nuclear energy to keep our military side of nuclear going. I have talked to people on the military side who don't necessarily agree with that. So it's not clear that even from a practical perspective, they really need a viable civilian nuclear industry. I think that it's almost a myth that has grown up because there's always been this symbiotic relationship between the two sides of nuclear. That's a lot about what my book was, and why I started, you know, why I wrote about it. I wanted to explain how one led to the other and the interplay between the two, that they needed, you know, if you don't have a viable civilian industry, how are you going to get the experts you need for the weapons side? And, you know, maybe there's a point because maybe a lot of people don't, you know, that have really, really great scientific minds want to use them towards weapons of mass destruction. I can imagine a lot of people would find that pretty unappealing. So maybe they think and maybe they kind of say, well, okay, we'll give you the job you want after we make you do some weapons design, use your brain for weapons design, and then you can go off and do other stuff. I mean, I have a good reason to think that kind of stuff goes on within the laboratory system and the system that raises up the brain power in this country and applies it to the nuclear energy field. But it doesn't mean it's a good thing. I don't know what the answer is to the problem of nuclear weapons. That's a whole nother discussion. It's a really, really difficult one. And I don't know that I want to get into it, but I think that's a factor. I think that if we didn't have nuclear weapons, we would not have nuclear energy. I don't think it would be an issue because it's like such a no-brainer. It's so expensive, for one thing. Never mind the safety, never mind the waste. It's just expensive. It's like Peter Bradford's favorite line is, you know, yeah, we have a global food crisis too, hunger crisis, but we're not going to throw caviar at it, are we, to solve it? Well, you could say the same about nuclear as a solution to climate change. I'm not sure how long I've been talking, but I think I've been talking long enough, and I'd really love to hear what other people have to say at this point, because there's a lot of really smart people in the audience. So I think that I'm going to hand it back to Jan and David.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think you've done a really good job of explaining what the problem we're all facing is what's happening to the money. And it's a very interesting take that you have on it. So before I call on Rita or Dave, and I know that we need to call on Dave, I wanted to just talk for a minute about the rules, since I'm from Chicago. Okay, so each person that I call on gets a question and one follow-up. You don't get two follow-ups unless at the end, if we're still in session and you still have a follow-up question that you want, you can ask it when other people have had a chance. But when I do call on you, you get two questions. If you're making a question or a long comment and you don't need feedback from the speaker, your comment may not be more than 3 minutes. And I'm looking at this audience and I'm thinking, that's not going to work. So, and so I'm thinking, if you have something to say, we're not going to stick you on that. Okay. Okay. And this is how to get called on. Raise your hand from an icon at the bottom of the screen. So if you go to the bottom of the screen and your screen is at the top of your computer, there will be a little heart that says react. And if you click on that, it will say raise hand. And 3 people have already done that. But if you don't like that method, you can just wave your hand and we'll be trying to keep track of who wants to ask a question first. And a third way is to put your question in the chat. And if you want to ask a question, put the word stack in the chat. So then we'll put you on what's called the stack. And you will get a second chance to speak, if not before 1/2 the hour, and no one else has raised their hand. Our session is an hour and a half, but it almost always goes longer, and often the speaker is tolerant to keep with us until everybody's asked their questions. So we're going to start from the top here, and Rita McDonald has the first question. We'd like to see you, Rita, if you don't mind, but if you do, you can keep your video off. But anyway, Rita, what's your question?
Hey, Stephanie, Rita McDonald, the Chief Operating Officer of the Samuel Lawrence Foundation. First, thank you so much for coming out to California in July and being a huge star of the Samuel Lawrence Foundation's Radioactive Waste Symposium. We really appreciate everything that you've done for the organization, and it was amazing to have you speak at the symposium. My question relates to framing the nuclear power issue. I think that in a certain sense, like the mainstream media and people on the right and left kind of look at nuclear power activists as kind of like crazy folk. And maybe a better way to get the issue across is not to be anti-nuke, but to be anti-nuclear waste. Because there is no argument, at least in my opinion, that nuclear waste is dangerous and toxic and there's no solution for it. So if you reframe the question of how much does it cost to deal with the nuclear waste? Where is the money to deal with the nuclear waste going? Like at our little decommissioned nuclear generating plant, San Onofre, for example, billions of dollars has been spent and no one knows where it goes. And all of that money is paid for by ratepayers. And so I'm just wondering, just thinking outside the box, is maybe we have like kind of a framing issue where if we reframe to look at nuclear waste as this huge issue, toxic radioactive waste that is deadly, maybe that's a better way to, and if you can't deal with that, how can you possibly be building new power plants? Just a
Okay.
thought. What do you think?
Okay, Rita, great to hear from you, and
Thank you.
Thank you for all your very generous compliments. My own feeling about framing it around one issue like safety, waste, non-proliferation is you go too far. You leave yourself open to people who will say, oh, well, the amount of nuclear waste we have would only take up the size of a football field to store it, or something like that. They'll get one thing and then they'll beat this drum, and they'll go around the problem of that it's radioactive forever, and they'll find other ways. To my way of thinking, what really killed it in the 80s, the accident at Chernobyl was a big help, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, but
Right.
and it would be nice if we didn't have to keep having massive accidents with major losses of global real estate to have another period of people opposing nuclear energy. The thing that really killed it was Wall Street, because Wall Street, and I remember a guy who was an advisor to Udall, was hired by one of the Wall Street firms. You do it on cost, because it's not just nuclear waste that's costly, it's building a reactor, and it's the time it takes to build it. It's just the practical thing. Instead of getting emotional about, oh, because people they're almost, I don't know, people don't seem to be worried about radioactivity the way they used to. They don't seem to be, they should be, but they're not. And they need kind of like to be shocked into the reality of what it might be like to, every time you go shopping, have to apply a Geiger counter to your groceries. But leaving all that aside, when you just talk to people who think that people that are against nuclear power are emotional and not very rational, and you talk to them about the dollars and cents of it, that gets their attention. That gets their attention more than anything, because they don't really want to plow into all the science. They don't want to plow into all the problems. They just want to look at the bottom line. And so I saw it happen in the 80s, where it was the cost and Wall Street's recognition of it that marked it down. You look at I cannot remember the utility, but I used to listen to their quarterly reports. The guy, the CEO would talk about the company. And gosh, here's where my memory is going, but it was a company that was trying to unload one reactor, and it was having trouble, and they were always getting questioned about that. I'll think about it, because I'm not doing this as much as I used to, so I don't remember. But every quarter they'd say, and what's the story with that? Because that was keeping their share price down. Their nuclear holding was keeping their share price down. So when you get Wall Street's attention and it's negative, that has a huge, huge bearing, because the costs of borrowing are so high, the utilities can't build. So it kind of blocks them and stops them that way. It's more effective. That's why Congress is passing so much money. And of course, that helps them on Wall Street but it's not a guarantee for the future congressional spending. So that would be my response, my immediate response. I would reframe it more on the general costs of nuclear, not just on the costs of waste and the problem of waste.
With respect to waste, on a national basis, there is actually 200 million pounds of spent fuel that's being stored at various nuclear power plants. 200 million pounds.
Yeah.
So it's not a trivial matter.
Absolutely not. And it's absolutely one of many reasons why it's a poor choice. I would say that, yeah, I would say that to any utility that had that was actually proposing to build a reactor now, like a Georgia Power, or in the future Duke, say, or any of these kind of companies, if they actually proposed, I would say that one of the strongest points to make in locally especially is, okay, are you guys prepared to host the waste for the foreseeable future? Because that's what you're going to have to do when the waste starts, when the spent fuel pools start filling up. 5 years has gone by or longer because the fuel is maybe, say, higher enriched. They're going to have to host the waste. And I would say that to anybody that's building a small modular reactor or building these, fast reactors with fuel that's a lot more complicated and a lot more dangerous, the local people should be made aware of the fact that they will be hosting this. This will be in their neighborhood as long as they can look out into time. That's the reality. Yeah, so I agree with you on that. I would definitely say that would be a point to push, especially on any kind of new reactor projects.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I really thank Rita for this question because she's really into it on account of being so close to San Onofre. And of course, we know the movie SOS is about not only the cost, but especially the waste at San Onofre, because it's probably one of the biggest local problems in the nation. Well, there's always Oconee, but we'll go on. And our next question is coming from Dave Lockbaum.
Great.
Go ahead, Dave, please.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank Stephanie for her information. I've long admired Stephanie, and I've always listened to her, Stephanie, because her voice is very well insightful, well articulated, and I learned a lot every time, including tonight. I wanted to speak to small modular reactors. There's talk about resurrecting Palisades and perhaps resurrecting 3 Mile and Unit 1. I think that speaks a lot to the small modular reactors. If spending billions of dollars to resurrect an 8-track tape player instead of today's technology tells you that small modular reactors are just too cost prohibitive to be viable in the 21st century. And when I read the Wall Street Journal last week about 3 Mile and Unit 2, if I was worked for the Unit of Consensus Science Fictionists, I would have loved it, but I don't. I think that tells you that small modular reactors are not ready for prime time. Do you agree, Stephanie?
I think small modular reactors have never been ready for prime time, and you're the one that's helped me understand that. You're one of the ones that have helped me understand that more than anybody, and why. I mean, we had small modular reactors in the 50s, and what did they do? They scaled them up because they weren't economic. And the same problem, I mean, you can't get rid of these. These are just realities of economics, of building, of construction projects. So small modular reactors, I wasn't quite clear how that's related. I guess what you're saying is that, yeah, they're resurrecting Palisades and TMI because they know they're not going to get small modular reactors. I think the DOE, I will add something else. The DOE pretty much acknowledged that in the report that came out. It came out my last year when I was editor of EIG in April. And that was the one that shocked me, where it talked about actually tripling nuclear capacity in the United States by the year 2050. And I read this and I thought, okay, this must be just throwing up a trial balloon. But in that report, it was very interesting because they were tacitly acknowledging that SMRs are not going to do it. SMRs and advanced reactors are not going to give us the capacity we need. They talked about them as, oh yeah, they'd be nice pieces of the larger picture. If we could build a few here and there, they might fill in places and be nice, filler. But basically you needed to go back to the large reactors. So the DOE knows that. I think Moniz has known it forever. I think the reason that this whole SMR advanced reactor thing got started in earnest was because after Fukushima, when Fukushima happened in 2011, GNEP was kind of rolling to a bad end, and the DOE needed to come up with a new ruse to kind of push nuclear. They knew they could not push large reactors because Vogtle was already becoming a disaster, and Summer in South Carolina, and nothing else was going. Of all those other projects that had been proposed, none of them were going forward. So now what? Oh, well, let's go back and look. Let's dust off some old plans from long ago. And they come up with this thing, and they came up with this small modular reactor program, the first project of which failed. Dave, you can remember the name, you know, it was BWXT or something. Anyway, that folded up in 2017. Then you had the New Scale project, which was the second SMR lead project. That failed. I don't know if another candidate has bounced forward on that particular program. I know the Bill Gates reactor project which is, there's two different programs. There's a small modular reactor program, and then there's the advanced reactor program, and there's two lead reactor projects for that. And one of those seems to be going forward. I have no idea how that's going to play out. I'm not optimistic. I don't think we're going to see breeder reactors in this country, you know, but I know that Bill Gates's plan is to build a 1 gigawatt breeder. And, you know, to me, that is like, you know, everyone thinks he is the smartest man in the world because he made a lot of money, but I think, I'm sorry, I don't, you know, I'm not that impressed. I mean, if breeders were meant to be, they would have been around already, but that ship sailed a long time ago into the sunset, and it's not returning, I don't think. You know, you just wait. Like I always felt as an editor, and you have to write this every week, you'd be seeing all this stuff. And I mean, my colleagues and I used to joke that, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this, perhaps I don't want to, well, I'm not making fun of our publication, but we used to say perhaps we should call ourselves Nuclear Fiction Weekly or something, because we were putting out all these stories about all these plans that we knew, most of which would never see the light of day. I mean, you just kind of know it after you've been doing it for years and years. You've watched it, you watched all the hype, and you just feel like there's just so much more hype than there is anything real on the ground. I mean, I think it would be so different covering like solar compared to covering nuclear. So
No, I agree. I agree with you, Stephanie. I have a better chance of winning the lottery, and I don't buy tickets.
well, let us know if you do, you know. I think you do have a better chance of winning the lottery.
I keep going. I keep muting myself because I have this thing. But when you say you thought, well, they'll never do that. I never thought. I saw the plan for San Onofre waste, and I thought, no worries, they'd never do that. And so I've learned my lesson on that one. Okay, I'd like to tell people who are on the list. Connie is next, and then Craig, then Alfred, and there's 5 or 6 more people on the list. And so next will be Connie and then Craig. And after that, we'll call on Alfred and then go down the list. But that's the order so far. So go ahead, Connie, ask your question.
Thank you so much for doing this. Unfortunately, reporters like you are a dying breed. That's my question, but first I'd like to make a comment. If all of this isn't depressing enough, I'll further depress you. Yesterday, and I think some of the people that are in attendance attended the NRC meeting yesterday about a report that the Advanced Act is requiring the NRC to get to Congress on basically rolling back environmental impact studies, environmental impact for both existing reactor extended licenses and new reactor licenses. And this probably, according to the NRC, will result in regulations. At this point, it's a report that's due to Congress the first week of 2025. As some of you know, I've been doing this since 1972. And in my opinion, the Advance Act is probably the most frightening thing I've seen come down the pike.
Wow.
And the whole atmosphere, the whole bipartisan atmosphere now in Congress and in the states is just terrifying. But anyway, my question is this. You know, there was a time when reporters were calling me on nuclear issues, on local nuclear issues. Now I can't get any interest on, for example, the license extension application for the Perry nuclear power plant. These are by and large young reporters. In Ohio, these reporters did good investigative reporting on House Bill 6, the scandal. I really would like your opinion on what you think might be the best way to capture the interest and attention of this new generation of reporters. It's like pulling teeth to try to get coverage. I agree with you completely. Wall Street is one aspect, you know, financing and expense, and the other thing, God forbid, and even this is no guarantee of getting attention, is another accident, which is inevitable. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet now, but I really would like any advice or approach that you think might be successful.
I mean, Carol, Connie, I really appreciate your comments and your question. It's an extremely difficult question to answer. I would say that if I had time, or if somebody would write a really a really powerful piece on environmental considerations. We have someone in the audience that really knows about what's happening to the Pacific Ocean from the dumping of tritium-laced water from Fukushima, for example, who would be great to hear from. But the thing that has to be emphasized, and the thing that there's an imbalance here. There's an imbalance because the younger, you know, we used to talk about the younger generation. Everyone is consumed by the issue of climate change, and it's understandable. But to the point that nothing else environmental seems to matter anymore. I mean, yeah, we have to get carbon emissions down and so on and so forth, but not to the point that you pollute the groundwater that is happening from nuclear reactors, not to the point that you risk an accident and a discharge and radioactivity spreading everywhere. I mean, they, I mean, in the 70s, they were able to stop reprocessing because of an article that was written in the New Yorker. You probably remember that talked about what could happen non-proliferation wise, and it scared everybody. I mean, maybe people are awakened when they're fearful. That's one way to approach it. I mean, to just say, look, this is what would happen. I'm reading a book now that just came out by Annie Jacobson called Nuclear War, and it's terrifying. It's hypothesizing what happens if the North Koreans send an ICBM to the East Coast United States, and it goes literally second by second, minute by minute, what our government's response mechanism is, and it's terrifying because there's no stopping an ICBM once it arrives. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, my God, our civilization is so fragile. It's paper thin. It could disappear overnight. Well, life as people know it in your area could disappear overnight if there's a bad accident. Ask anyone who lived in the area around Fukushima or who lived in Belarus or around Ukraine when Chernobyl happened. I mean, it isn't just for 5 minutes. It's basically for the rest of their lives. I mean, after Fukushima happened, I remember there was a group from, I think maybe Beyond Nuclear sponsored them, but they came to Politics and Prose in DC. And there was this one a little Japanese, she was very young and she came from a farm because, you know, that whole area around Fukushima is basically agricultural. And she was speaking in Japanese and translated, and she was crying on the stage because she said, my life is over. Our farm is over. We'll never go back to farming here. And I've never forgotten that. If people could only understand, that's why I called it Immortal Hands. That title, by the way, we struggled and struggled. My editor spent an entire weekend walking around Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm giving him credit because he was I thought it was perfect, Immortal Hands, because that's exactly what we're talking about. We are mortal beings. We are not perfect. We make mistakes, and nuclear reactors, like nuclear weapons, they can't afford mistakes. I mean, serious mistakes. You can get away with little ones, probably. Dave knows because he operated reactors, but you know, you can't afford big ones. And you know, I don't know how you actually reach out. Can you call these people and talk to them, or is it an article somebody needs to write to send to them? I don't know how you wake people up. If I knew that answer, I would be feeling a lot more optimistic right now.
You know, the reporters, the whole, I mean, I appreciate what the print media, you know, newspaper industry is going through. It's, you know, I feel for them.
Yeah.
But there are no phone numbers. You know, I used to have cell phone numbers when cell phones came into being.
They don't pick up.
There's no number. There's no number that you can call, and you know they ignore emails. So
yeah, I know. I totally sympathize with you. It's a different generation. I'm not of that generation. I don't understand the thinking. It's just very. I'm afraid I don't. I wish I could say I had an answer, but I don't. But I do believe a strong piece needs to be written by people with strong environmental credentials that points out that you don't sacrifice other parts of the environment like unnecessarily when there are other choices. I mean, I'm aware too, by the way, solar energy, you know, the lithium mining is bad. There's a lot of bad things going on in the environment to deliver us energy, but you have to decide, okay, what is least environmentally harmful to deliver the electricity and the energy we need while also addressing climate change. And I don't think nuclear energy in any way is going to meet the criteria that you know that you would define if you were asking that question, you know. And maybe those are the kind of things that need to be thought about and written about more. So that's something for anyone that wants to write and think about that stuff. That's an article that needs to be written. And it needs to be strong and powerful and go into a large, it needs to hit a wide audience, especially people in Congress.
Well, thank you, Connie and Stephanie. And now we're calling on Craig. So be sure you unmute yourself, Craig. Craig is from Michigan and has been is an engineer himself.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm a recovering technologist. I have searched for years. I thought that we were going to be able to solve this with technology, and what I'm finding is that technology is the problem. I mean, all that we call progress in technology has led us to this, you know, where we're at. We're in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. And so it's our hubris, it's our belief that that we're making progress, or it's our desire to believe that we are making progress. So you asked, well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for Immortal Hands. I read that, I think Kevin Camps gifted me your book back in 2017, and I really enjoyed it. And it's I pulled it out today, and I'm looking. I need to reread this. It looks good. So, and I enjoyed it when I did read it. So thank you.
Thanks.
But I've been really pondering and studying, trying to get deeper to the root cause of our environmental crisis. But it seems to me, when you ask why are we in the midst of another nuclear renaissance, and the answer is this is our last great big spending party. It's like our politicians cannot tell the people the truth that we're in deep problems. We're not going to hit our 2030 goals. We're not going to hit our 2050 goals. We've been talking about this for, we've been having these COP summits for, 30 years or whatever, and all the trends have not wavered. We have continued to get worse and worse every year. We're using more and more energy every year. All of the solar and wind that we've added has not offset any of the fossil fuel, the nuclear. It has just added to our total energy consumption. The root cause of our environmental crisis and what we're doing is our lifestyles. And no one wants to hear that. No politician can tell their constituents, well, like if we wanted to actually avert the collapse of our climate, which will, or where we're killing off life on this planet, and we are part of this ecosystem. As the planet dies, we will die. No politician can tell their constituents that because it's bad news. So they say, well, hey, let's spend some money and then you'll have more jobs and everything will be great. And okay, nuclear, it's a delusion to say, hey, we got a solution. When anybody who's actually studied it, they know we don't have a solution. Well, we don't have easy solutions. We don't have solutions that people will accept. And so right now, the reason we have the Renaissance is that delusion. That's what the politicians can offer the people. And it's what they offer the people that help them get reelected. Lots and lots of money. So we're having just this great big party. A great big spending party. And, the Inflation Reduction Act was the biggest climate bill in the U.S. history. But it's not going to solve the problem. It's actually just making the problem worse because we're not getting to the root cause of the problem. And that's what we've come to expect in our lifestyle. All this energy, we're going to have to change. So
I hear you about, gosh, the sixth mass extinction. That's real food for thought. Can I just say something as an English major? I was not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I was an English literature major, and I love words. And I don't think we should refer to it as a renaissance because the real Renaissance produced beautiful, beautiful works of art. This is not a renaissance. This is a phony roller coaster ride that's keeping, I'm so cynical at this point that I think that a lot of this stuff that the utilities do, like these AI plans, it's just to keep the ball rolling, to keep Wall Street happy, to keep their pension plans going and they're looking at they're looking at when they're going to retire. I don't think they care actually if these things work out. I think they just are keeping a lot of balls in the air with stuff like this. I just think it's a lot of baloney. And yeah, I mean, but the trouble is it's a lot of hot air and it's real money coming from the government that ought to be going somewhere where it's needed, and.
Right. Yeah. So like we could actually spend these billions of dollars on things that would work.
Yeah.
That's the tragedy.
Well, and a lot of things need to happen, like utilities need to be reformulated. I don't like they have too much power the way they do transmission. The whole deliveries, to me, the key is the delivery system of electrons and not building more generation. We have plenty of generation. I remember I wrote a piece, I think it was last year, where they were, devoting all this money to nuclear energy. And there were like so many solar and wind projects lined up, but maybe a fifth of them would ever actually see the light of the day, mainly because they couldn't get grid access, mainly because the grids our whole grid system is balkanized in the United States. It's dominated by utilities that have an interest in keeping independents out and keeping their existing plant running because they put money in it, whether it's coal, nuclear, gas. It's so cynical. And, you know, and we don't have a real Department of Energy. We have a Department of Defense and we have a Department of, well, as Jan calls it, the War Department, but we also, the Department of Energy is misnamed. Carter named it that because he hoped to actually make it become a real Department of Energy, but it's not. You know, 2/3 of its budget goes to nuclear one way or another. So we don't have anybody really making a national energy policy. We don't have a national system for delivery. We don't have a national approach to the whole problem, and we need one because we need to get wind in remote areas to where it's needed in heavily populated areas, and the same with solar, but mostly, you know, wind, I think. You know, you probably don't even need a lot of these offshore Atlantic installations if you could get existing wind from the plains, you know, east. But I've talked to companies that are trying to do it. They run into so many problems in the States, and the, you know, PJM and MISO, all these regional transmission organizations, they're all fiefdoms, and they're controlled by powerful utilities. So you know, there's all these problems and they're not being tackled properly at all. And as you say, the politicians they would never speak. They just want to stay in office. So they look for easy solutions too, as you pointed out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all these questions. They're very interesting. And so next is Alfred, and then there's going to be Bob Babcock, and after that, Dave Kraft. Bob, I hope you'll come back. If you don't, it will be Dave Kraft and Carolyn. But if Bob Babcock wants to, he could be after Alfred. Go ahead, Alfred.
Yes, I want to thank NEIS and also our guest tonight for sharing this wonderful information. I heard you talk about, Stephanie, that some things don't seem to make sense, and I want to kind of step back just a little bit for an overview, because I think that when we focus our discussion about nuclear energy on climate change, that we've been led into a blind alley, in essence, because I believe that the idea that nuclear power will solve climate change is completely false. It's a sales pitch. And, you know, it's the opposition and the reasons why it won't solve climate change are both important and true. But what happens is that the real driver, I believe, is that our nation, the United States of America, is playing a huge game of nuclear catch-up with both Russia and China. They're the only two countries that are building a few reactors, not many, but a few. We've struggled. I mean, you know, the alert of South Carolina and Georgia both as catastrophic things. And so I think the government is really, we're being duped, in essence, to think that we're going to solve climate change. It can't happen. It won't happen. The real purpose of this is to support new nuclear weapons, which we are working on and delivering, and the nuclear navy. I mean, think about it for a minute. A small modular reactor, really, I don't think it's essential for Kansas to have a small reactor. There's plenty of room in Kansas. But if you're going to put that in a nuclear submarine, size really does matter. So that, I think, is driving but in the meantime, to carry on this false charade that this is going to solve climate change, there has to be the appearance that this is a thriving industry, and therefore vast amounts of money and so many different bills, lots of money to pay for students to study this. Even restarting the zombie reactors proves the point that this is a vital, everything's fine, don't you worry your pretty little head about anything kind of effort. And the bipartisan nature is that it's such a huge part of our economy. Everybody likes it because a little bit of it's in their congressional district too. And I'd like to end my comment and invite your response to it, please, with a quote from Senator John Barrasso, a Republican of Wyoming, This is from spring of 2023 when he and Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia introduced the Advance Act. Barroso said, and I quote, "Russia and China are using nuclear energy as a weapon to advance their national interests and threaten the world. The free world is desperate for an alternative. The United States must reestablish its historic global leadership in nuclear energy." End quote. And in my mind, nuclear energy means the energy of the nuclear bomb and the energy of the nuclear navy with which to deliver them. Thanks very much.
Wow, thank you, Alfred. That's very interesting, and I think you hit upon a really important point. I do not disagree with at all. But if the department, if what I understand you to be saying is that the Department of Energy is pushing SMRs and advanced reactors to try to match what Russia and China are doing on that front, I would say that that's probably true, but I'm not sure how much those efforts in China are related to their weapons program, though they could be, because the separation between civil and military in China is not as strong as it supposedly is or once was here. I'm not, I mean, I don't know enough about the military side. I know the company that builds reactors, the naval reactors, isn't it BWXT that builds the naval reactors? I mean, when you talk to them, they're so confident. I feel like they're doing just fine without the need to have a million different companies doing projects, different types of technologies. A lot of these technologies are old and dated, and if they had been viable, they would have been already doing them. There is a potentially bigger problem for the military with the lack of United States enrichment capability on the fuel side. But it's not clear, it's never been clear to me that all these different reactor models and designs that people are working on are necessarily related to the naval nuclear program. What I do think is important is that there's a lot of hype around it because we want to look like we're a leader in this field and we want to sell to other countries. That is also key. I think the selling of reactors is absolutely key, but this brings to mind the 50s when we were giving away research reactors all over the world, competing with Russia, which was doing the same thing. And look what that led to. A huge fuel take-back program from I think that started in the 80s, 90s. But I mean, that was just ridiculous. I mean, we were giving them highly enriched uranium back then. Well, now we're talking about selling right into the Eastern European war zone. I mean, what? Talk about the sixth mass extinction. I mean, it is like these are insane things that we're doing to keep up with the Russians and the Chinese. That it's really a competition for geopolitical influence more than it is keeping our Navy, our U.S. nuclear Navy alive and well, and and I know we're advancing stuff on the nuclear weapons front, but I don't think that the research that's being done, the work that's being done by Bill Gates, or the research that's being done by various companies working on other types of nuclear technologies necessarily helps the U.S. the military side of our nuclear program. But I'm not enough of an expert on that. But my gut feeling is it's just like a free for all. It's like throw money here, throw money there, see what works, see what sticks to the wall. And mainly though, it's trying to, work with the Canadian, it's trying to just, keep our seat at the nuclear table and be a big shot at the IAEA. It's just all these kind of things are tied into this thing, and it's to keep people having jobs in the government and in the nuclear labs.
What I see it as is that it's a huge and vast infrastructure, and it's industry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's it's academic.
Yep.
And academic's a problem because both our infrastructure and our staffing of it are
Yeah.
aging out. And
Yeah.
so this needs to be presented as the attractive, cutting edge, this is where the action's happening kind
Yeah.
of thing. Where in fact, like Michael Schneider points out with the World Nuclear Industry Status Report, this industry has been declining since 2002.
Yeah.
It's been in decline. And so what this really is for is to support this vast infrastructure in the government too. And
Yeah.
a curious little tidbit from Moniz is that we have almost a 1-to-1 correlation of number of reactors on land and at sea.
Yeah, that's interesting.
93 reactors operating on land and in the low 90s at sea. I don't know the exact number. And I would maintain that thereby those reactors on land, their real purpose, I mean, it's an incidental byproduct of some electricity. Their real purpose is supporting the infrastructure that allows for the reactors to be at sea. And for the vast infrastructure and academic training and all that stuff needed to make the new nuclear weapons. And thereby, all the perfectly important and legitimate critiques of nuclear power can't solve climate change, you hit the bullseye dead in the center, but it's a fake target. Doesn't matter. We're talking about our defense and what's our security worth. You're not going to spend the money on that. And hey, sorry about the sick people and the destroyed environment, this, that, and the other, but we have to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to be safe by being unsafe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But
that it grew out of the bomb program. And now it's feeding the bomb program. I mean, they have been tied together since the birth of this whole thing. And I mean, it's kind of in a loose way, but yeah, in the larger sense of keeping these companies that support the military side, if they can give them more business to subsidize them by throwing it into the civilian sector, they do that.
But with the equal numbers on land and at sea, you need twice as much as everything. If you didn't have them on land, you'd have half the size of the market.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why it's so popular and bipartisan, because everybody's got some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they have a lot of the military side is in a lot of important states all over the country. Yeah, good reason for that.
Well, we need to get back to the stack if we can. And I just want to make sure that that Bob Babcock is seriously dropped out of the stack and he doesn't want to be called on.
I'm here.
But okay, but it's your turn. Do you want to say something?
Well, hallelujah.
Okay.
I hear these conversations and I hear people talking solar, and I go apoplectic because I don't hear much of anything, if anything at all, about demand reduction. Our buildings leak like sieves. We have antiquated heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems. And I personally have seen, with an investment in sealing up the building envelope, switching over to a ground source heat pump without solar, okay, to be a savings of 70% on a house. 70%. And they didn't have air conditioning before, okay? And that's just one house. We're talking $1.6 billion, I'm hearing you say, to restart 3 Mile Island. That's the equivalent of taking 40,000 homes off the grid, reducing the need. I mean, taking them totally freaking off the grid. And there are ways of energy storage, like using carbon fiber tanks and compressed air energy storage, that we don't really need the lithium. We have so many different ways of producing energy. We could put like small turbines in our water systems, so that as the water moves through the system, we're generating electricity. There's the tidal possibilities. There's just so many. There are wind turbines that can be placed at the peak of the roof that produce electricity at 4 miles an hour. Okay, it's called aerotexture.
Wow.
We have so many alternatives, and yeah, there's not a whole lot of money there. Oh, I'm sorry, honey. You know, maybe it's not all about the money. Maybe it's about the survival of our planet for our children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren, and so on. But it just makes me nuts. There is virtually no conversation about demand reduction, about becoming more efficient, and we can do it. That's the
Oh,
low.
I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on demand reduction, but definitely that's part of it. And definitely, I mean, I hear Amory Lovins talking about that all the time. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, we have to get on it. But I think what we're talking about is a larger problem here, Bob. And I love the kind of stuff you're talking about. It's great, but I think what we're talking about is a larger problem. And we can definitely do it. Of course we can do it, but there are blockages in the way. And the big block, as Alfred Meyer points out, is really the nuclear weapons, because this whole industry and all the wastage that goes into it is perpetuated by our inability and the global inability to get rid of nuclear weapons. And that you know, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but the weapons were the genesis of the civilian side of nuclear, and everything grows out of that, and it remains so to this day. And that is why there is, and as Alfred pointed out, all these congressional districts, so many of really important ones, like Dianne Feinstein's old district in California, they have the big DOE labs, and they want that money in their states, and so they all support it. And it's it's insidious. And
I can't believe we're still fighting this shit.
well, you better believe it, because that's the problem. The problem is not that we can't find solutions. I think the solutions are sitting right here. They exist today. It's not a magic formula. It's common sense stuff like you're talking about. It's just that we have an insane situation. I mean, the whole nuclear project is kind of a sort of form of insanity, and organized insanity. And and you know, we have North Korea has, I mean, what do we do with you know, a country like North Korea that has nuclear weapons if we don't keep our nuclear weapons? I mean, it's really difficult. What do you do? And I mean,
I remember back in 1982, we shut down the United Nations, protesting the fact that we had reached MAD, mutually assured destruction.
yeah.
And we wanted some definite movement in
Mhm.
stopping the nuclear weapons movement. And we remember, what was it called back then? The nuclear free.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I can't remember. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's only like pushing 50 years. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to call on Dave Kraft now. So go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thanks. And before I actually get into the question, a little bit of a process point, and it ties into the last discussion we've had about the connection with weapons and reactor. As you can all see, the chat is very, very lively tonight. There are a lot of good conversations in there. There are a lot of good links. And I want to call your attention to one I put in. Stephanie was on a radio interview about 2 hours long, I guess, last October on with the title of a program called The End of the Nuclear Age. And it is really a very, very interesting interview. You won't get the whole interview, just the teaser part. It's about a half hour long. Anyway, that's an example of the kind of link you're going to find. And I want to mention that everyone who has attended tonight will get a copy of the chat. So you'll be able to look some of these links up and give them a try. My question to you takes you back to your role as a journalist, Stephanie. And that is when you were, you know, in the trenches doing this day in, day out, you know, working with nuclear intelligence, how did you see your relationship in covering these issues? How did it resonate with or connect with any of the mainstream media people? And were there any individuals that you would call out as particularly memorable? And then the final piece of that is, you know, any suggestions moving forward that might be useful from that period in your life?
That's an interesting question. I didn't run into that many mainstream journalists, mainstream media journalists, other than maybe at like the IAEA, or certainly covering the Iran talks. I ran into all sorts of mainstream journalists. That was interesting. To the extent that sometimes mainstream journalists would provide tips to stories that we hadn't seen regionally, but the coverage was, and the coverage was decent, but it would never go to the kind of depths that we had to go to. Like, we were analyzing much more deeply and looking at it from a point of view of what the industry, anybody that really followed it closely would want to read. And so the mainstream media wasn't always that important. It was sort of there on the sidelines. I didn't really interact with them much. And I was just always closer to people like you guys, and also to the industry. I was always going between both sides, talking to everybody, talking to people in Congress to the extent I could, talking to politicians, talking to diplomats, because we were covering all aspects. And we were talking to economists all the time, and bankers in Wall Street. So we had such a wide range of people that we talked to. I mean, we ran out of time we were always running out of time. We were up against these weekly deadlines, and we were trying to get to the bottom of things all the time. And it's not that easy, because these are complicated stories. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't say more about the mainstream. I don't want to be critical of them. Sometimes I found the coverage to be too pro-nuclear in very prominent newspapers, which was disappointing. And I think now, one of the things that led to this New York Times piece that got published last year was, earlier this year. The genesis was a piece in, I think it was, I can never remember because I wrote for the other one, whether it was Forbes or Fortune, but it was a piece that was so pro-nuclear a year ago in February. And my niece said, see, why are you so anti-nuclear? Look at this. And I was so annoyed that my niece, who I consider really smart, would consider this I said, this is just a piece of, this is rubbish, this piece. But it became my motivation for writing a piece for the alt. I think I wrote a piece for Fortune anyway that got in, and then I wrote another piece. And then finally I wrote this New York Times piece. And I was really glad that it got in the New York Times, because I wanted a big, powerful organ like that to publish this stuff. And the New York Times had been pretty pro. I mean, they were not easy to write for, because they kept questioning my opinion. And I had to fight for every word, but they finally published it, which was good. I mean, it got modified, but I was glad it got in there.
Okay. Jan, could I do a follow-up? Oh, she's on mute. Well, I'm going to do a follow-up. When I look at the chat here, when I deal with my colleagues all over the place, I get this pit in my stomach that I see a lot of "ain't it awful? Ain't it awful?"
Yeah.
And it's realistic. I mean, we're getting our brains beat in media. However, instead of complaining to each other, we need to start being creative about how do we counter that. And I want to run two thoughts to you and just get your reaction to it. There was some time back, I think it was 2016 or so, where I got into a pissing match with someone from the Wall Street Journal, and I ended up involving fairness and accuracy and reporting in the story. And that turned things around. The other was a group called the Society of Professional Journalists. And what I've been thinking, not just on this issue, but I'm seeing a lot of it on issues like the Middle East and elsewhere, that rather than complain to each other in the comments section or on these meetings, we ought to be writing these professional agencies calling out the credentials of these idiots who are parroting nonsense or lies, and going after their professional credentials. Seriously.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had heard of either of these or used them in the past, or what you think of the idea, but I think it's a lot better than complaining.
I think you're absolutely right. You're talking about the Society of Professional Journalists. And then what was the other organization?
Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I think they're based on, fair.
I think it's a great idea to talk to these I don't know much about them, to be honest. I was never kind of, I mean, I once worked for the mainstream media, like ages ago. I worked for the Associated Press. I think that to get inside the journalist community is a brilliant idea. I would really, really encourage you to do that and say that, you know, and give them many, many samples. Like the stuff I saw last March that was coming out in mainstream magazines was shocking. It was so poorly. It was just like they literally talked to some PR guy and just regurgitated. It was not proper journalism. And I mean, I am trying to dial back how much work I do these days on this subject. But if you ever want me to, I mean, I can, you know, show me articles and I will critique them, and then I can do it in the language of journalists and send it back, and you can send it in and say, we think that you really, you need to reach out to your members. It'd be interesting to know who runs these organizations and how much influence they have in the journalist community. I'd be really interested to find that out.
Well, thanks for the offer, and we'll follow up on that with you. I'm just, like I say, I'm just getting tired of being martyred, you know, with "Ain't It Awful." We got to
Well,
start.
and also, why do they need to, for example, one thing that really annoyed me in the New York Times was you were supposed to talk, and people in my own organization would do this. They would refer to, like, Michael Schneider as an anti-nuclear advocate, an anti-nuclear activist or something like that. Well, you don't preface somebody from Exelon as a pro-nuclear activist, but that's what he is. So I cannot stand that sort of pejorative. It's like, you know, Kamala says, why is my race an issue in this campaign? You know, like that is so wrong. They should not do that. They should just say, you know, like somehow if you're in an anti-nuclear organization, you have to be, you know, it's almost like saying the former criminal or something. I don't know. It's just, you know, he works, who obviously you don't agree with nuclear. You can tell by the context. I don't see why that has to be a description. So I would always argue against it. And I would say, I don't want to put this in. Or as a compromise, you call somebody a nuclear skeptic. But, you know, I don't know. You can word it in different ways. There are more creative ways, and I could certainly suggest ways they can get around that problem.
Yeah, Michael is not his work is not anti-nuclear. It's just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and so he shouldn't be called anti-nuclear. It
You
happens
know, an
that
observer, a
the
long
facts-
time observer of the nuclear scene. I
Yeah,
would call him something
exactly.
neutral,
Mhm.
because, you know, that is, I think that's one area that really needs to be looked at, because the New York Times falls into that trap. The AP, all of them fall into that trap. They think that that's somehow being fairer, you know, but then you should call somebody from Exelon a pro-nuclear activist.
Yeah.
Or pro, you know, because they're more pro. I mean, they have so much more money behind them. And anyway, so that's a thought. But I think that's a very good idea, David. I really, really think that's a great idea.
I put the contact address and contact in the chat.
So getting back to the stack, we've got our our board member Linda is the next person to talk, and then Ace Hoffman, and after him Mark Lundholm. So Linda, I wonder if you'd mind asking your questions, because I thought they were both very, very interesting. And could you unmute yourself and ask the questions you put in the chat? Is she still here? Linda's extremely busy person. She's got,
I believe she had to sign off early.
lots of family and grandchildren. Okay, then, so we have Ace Hoffman, Mark Lundholm, and Carolyn. So Ace, let's hear from you. Ace has been having health problems lately. I don't see him on the list anymore. Okay, so is Mark Lundholm still here? Oh, there's Ace.
Sorry, I'm not used to this new device. Technology.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Is what questions could we ask our representatives to make them explain why they fund nuclear? I mean, we all know why, but what could we ask them that might they get them to tell us why?
Yeah. But the question is, they would then come out with the usual hype. And I don't know how you then get them to, then they give you, they give you a really a bog standard answer. And I don't know how you get around that then at that point.
Yeah, I'm guess I'm trying to find a way to get them to admit that there's that military connection.
They're politicians. They're really good at admitting nothing. You know.
Thank you. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
A wonderful
Yes.
presentation too.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ace, I just sent around Ace's review of Stephanie's book. I hope if you want it, you will, write to us, and because Ace wrote a review of Immortal Hands.
I put a link to it in the chat.
Oh, you put a link. Okay, good. And he's referring to Levin in California, who introduced a bill, and I'm not going to be able to put my finger on what the bill was about exactly. Can you just give us the name of that bill, or that Levin introduced?
Oh, I don't have the name, but it was co-sponsored by a Republican, and it's to find a solution to the nuclear waste problem by finding someone that'll take the waste temporarily, a CIS, which of course is not a solution at all.
Yeah.
And my point about it was just that's really just to extend it, just like Yucca Mountain did nothing but extend the whole nuclear industry for 20 years.
Yeah. Okay, so I wonder if Mark Lundholm is still here. I really would like to hear from him. Mark Lundholm, are you here? Guess we're not going to take a lot of time with this. Okay, so it's going to be Carolyn Kroom, James Heddle, and then Janice Wilton. So Carolyn, you go ahead and ask your question.
I did want to mention that I did put in the chat that the San Onofre, the SOS movie, the San Onofre Syndrome movie, is being offered for free starting tonight through October 13th. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing. And I think that the bill you were talking about is being promulgated by Senator Cruz from my state of Texas, but I haven't read much about the bill or anything about the bill really. So, the worst senator in the United States, but anyway, I guess I wanted to mention something related to what Dave Kraft was saying about possibility of trying to do something. I just remember hearing that the director of Atomic Bamboozle, Jan Haken, is that how you pronounce her name? Is it Haken? Had some connection with the 60 Minutes program. And she knew somebody or knows someone on that program. And I was just wondering, I just wanted to throw that out in case anybody thought that was a possibility for if approaching her to see if she might, if there's any possibility that she might be able to make some sort of connection with that program, it being a national TV program, and doing something in that light. Mm-hmm. And I'll just be very brief. I do not hear very much comparison between. I think there needs to be more comparison between the fossil fuel industry and the nuclear industry as strongly extractive industries. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of extraction going on with solar, but that is so tiny compared to the amount of nuclear, as well as the amount of coal and whatever. And then the other thing I don't hear anybody say, and I think this is something that's worth spreading around, because when the few times I've mentioned it recently, people are going, really? That land-based wind is produces 6 times, or well, I guess I have to say it around the other way around. Nuclear power in its whole cycle produces 6 times more carbon dioxide than land-based wind, and 2 times more than solar. And instead of just hearing, you just hear, oh, it's, nuclear is low carbon, or no carbon while generating, or whatever. And I'm not even sure it's not no carbon while generating, because carbon-14 is produced and then it reacts with oxygen, so that at least a small amount of carbon dioxide is being indirectly produced during generation. So these are things that I don't hear people talk about. And so I just wanted to pass that on, and I don't know how useful that is. And as far as what Bob Babcock was saying about demand reduction, energy efficiency, there's a lot of money out there for energy efficiency in the IRA right now.
Yeah.
And that's going to be happening in the next few years. So his, there's hope there for the demand reduction.
Good. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that wasn't a question.
No, I think what you said is great. I think, and it is interesting to note that in the campaign, whenever you hear them talking about energy, they never mention nuclear. Like, I don't hear Kamala Harris talking about nuclear in the context of the, the inflation, the IRA, or any of these major pieces of Biden legislation. They just talk about all the other stuff, because nuclear, they know, I think they know intuitively, nuclear is not a really big sell. It kind of is a dead word. And I don't even know how personally they feel about it. But you do know that as soon as they take power, and like whoever's the energy secretary just takes over this monster, and then they just have to spout the stuff, irrespective of what they really think. They have to promote it. It doesn't matter which party you're in. But I will say that it's interesting that they don't go around they talk about wind and solar, but they don't talk about nuclear, which kind of I feel is at least something positive.
Yes. And does anybody think of that getting in touch with the director of Atomic Bamboozle and running that idea by would be a good idea for?
I've never heard of it, but I'm fascinated. Director of Atomic Bamboozle?
Yes, and in fact, if I had your email address or something, you
take
can
it
for free through Monday if you want.
You can see it. It's a movie. What actually is it?
Movie. It's a 45-minute movie.
Great.
And it's sponsored for free by the Sierra Club, and there's a webinar.
Oh yeah.
Put on Monday night, Monday the 30th, and the 30th is technically the last day you could see it, but I think if you register and you start watching it, and it's such a short film anyway.
And you register through Sierra Club.
The link is in the chat.
Okay, all right. Okay. The link in. But all I was saying was I'm on a Sierra Club nuclear free core team. And I remember Janice Haken, who was on that meeting, saying something about, well, she, had some connection in the past to the 60 Minutes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I was just wondering had anybody else heard about that, and if that was something that sounded like worth,
Definitely it's worth it. Something like 60 Minutes would be great. Why doesn't she go on it? Just get her on it, I can give you my email, but or Dave can send it to you, Carolyn. I don't have your email either, so but rather than say it, I'll waste people's time with it over the message.
I'll put my email address in, but Dave is also going to put a link to that movie and the webinar.
Excellent.
But I'll put my email address in, and then you could maybe email me.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks.
And if other people also want to make contact, put your request in the chat. And then when we do this, send the chat out later, Stephanie can contact you That way you don't have to put your email out there, Stephanie. So.
Oh, okay. I don't really mind putting my email, but anyway,
okay.
all right.
I was thinking, you know.
Well, in spite of the way the screen looks, James had a comment in the chat early, and so I put his name down. And then we want to hear from Janice. James is going to be before you, Janice. She's our friend from Meme the Media. And then I'm going to call on Lori Johnson. So, and Jake, there's Jake, I'm calling on Lori, Michelle, and then you. So let's call on James Heddle. And he is one of the people that he and Mary Beth Brangan are the people who created, along with, you know, the usual suspects, the movie SOS. They created that movie. So let's hear from James next.
Well, thank you. I'm old enough to remember back in the mid years of the last century when to be anti-nuclear meant that you understood the symbiotic codependent relationship between nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, and nuclear waste as a deadly cycle, real nuclear triad in a way of speaking. But now that movement has been fragmented into little silos of anti-this and anti-that aspect of the whole nuclear enterprise. And we owe that term to Alfred Meyer. It's a very useful one because it's, to my mind, it's a way of reuniting this fragmented movement around a central realization that you, as Macron very plainly said, you can't have one without the other. They're bonded at the hip. So that needs to be recognized much more consistently. And it's a way of also indicating that this whole enterprise, the nuclear enterprise, is a fundamental moving part of the permanent war economy. And we've lost sight of that fact. You can't, again, you can't have one without the other, really. So I'd like to ask Stephanie to comment on the possibility of using the concept of the nuclear enterprise as a single threatening unit for reuniting the movement and the consciousness that this is a three-headed dragon. And I'd love to hear Alfred say something about that too. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. It's so absolutely right. I was mentioning before that the genesis of my book really was to explain this as a, you know, the Janus face industry, you know, it's two-faced. It has the civil side, the military side, but exactly what you're saying, that they are bonded at the hip and that one can't exist without the other. When I speak about the practical aspects of it, you know, it's hard when you're covering the civil industry and you're just really focused on that to see the larger picture. But when I was writing the book, I wasn't actually acting as a reporter in those days. I was just looking at the whole of it. And my book is focused on the whole of it, that the civil things sprang out of the need to find a better face to put on nuclear weapons, the fear of nuclear weapons, because the public was just getting used to it. I'm going to add one thought to this conversation, which is that my understanding is that from the beginning, the government kind of wanted the public to become numb to the fear because they understood that they had to accept that there would be a permanent presence of nuclear weapons. So they have always downplayed the dangers of radiation. They have downplayed the dangers of nonproliferation, except when it suited them not to. They downplay all the negative sides because they want the fear factor to go away. And to a large degree, I believe they have succeeded now. And I think that that's partly why we see all this hype unquestioning. There is no questioning, and anyone that would try to write like the way, the good writers in the 1970s did, to alert the public to the problems of breeder reactors and why they were so dangerous and reprocessing was so dangerous. Now you would just get a yawn and general ennui toward the subject of all of the fearful things, aspects of nuclear power, like it's old hat, oh, that's yesterday's news, when in fact it's ever present. So what you're saying is absolutely right, and thank you for saying it. But I think that part of this whole monstrous creation is to try to make the public just ignore it and forget about it. And they're like people that hide under mushrooms. I mean, they're like they're like undergrounders, in Orwellian undergrounders. And they kind of live in another world, another universe, but they're supported by all of us. And they won't go away anytime soon. And that's the problem we have. And the bigger problem is that we have a public that has swallowed the whole thing now. It's a new generation that thinks this is old people trying to teach them something that they don't need to be taught. And I'm just a journalist. I don't know how to solve such problems other than to write what I can and bring this to people's attention.
Thank you so much for the question, Jim. And
I wanted to do a quick follow-up to invite Alfred to respond. And also, I appreciated someone else putting in the chat the link to the fact that our film SOS, it's an award-winning documentary, will be shown for free worldwide for the coming months. And I'll put the link in the chat. But I'd really like to hear from you, Alfred, what you think. I credit you with identifying the nuclear enterprise for this, for the monster it is. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. And what I just briefly say is that I think this bifurcation of the nuclear weapons and nuclear power is exactly what the plan was. That this, and I take it back in the article I put in the chat, I take it back to really the creation of atoms for peace. That, as I understand it, the world, especially in the late 40s, was aghast at what this nuclear bomb had brought. And then there was huge movements against it. Meanwhile, the military saw this is how we dominate the world. We're not giving this ticket up. So, the military has prevailed. Eisenhower in August of 53 was horrified when the Russians exploded a highly sophisticated hydrogen bomb. And he almost went on the radio to have a chat with the American people to say, we're in deep doo-doo with this nuclear stuff. But instead, they came up with this other approach, which was the Atoms for Peace speech at the United Nations in December, and in which he called for the creation of something like the IAEA. And when the IAEA was created, and its mission, as it states on its own website, is the promotion of nuclear technology, but its initial management of that agency were all Americans. So we had our push in there, but it's to win public support. It's to make us all subliminally think, even though I'm not real happy with this idea, maybe we do need nuclear reactors to solve climate change, it's this pervasive sales pitch, and I don't know what's happened in between now and what I'm going to say next, but in February of 1944, Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, got the best advertising minds together. This is 18 months before the bomb was dropped, but they developed the PR campaign needed once this secret endeavor became public. But it's my suspicion that this strong PR campaign has been going since then. And that's why we have this big push for SMRs and, all this stuff. It's all smoke and mirrors. But it's this belief that this is the magic technological silver bullet that's going to save us. And that's how it's sold. But that it's, again, just back to the initial thing, that when we're addressing the enterprise through nuclear power only, we're being diverted.
May I just interject one thing? I don't think they believe it.
I
don't think they believe it's going to solve any climate change thing.
Doesn't have to. It just needs to
Right.
get research money. It has to look like it's happening.
Exactly.
We want to talk
It's
about
as you say, all
it.
smoke and mirrors. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at NewScale and they got something like $4 billion. So even though they appear to have failed, they were a big success. They got, okay, I do need to go back to David for just a minute because he has something to say about fear. And so I'm getting off of the stack, but Dave, go ahead, please, and say what you want to.
I am willing to hold off because Janice and Michelle have not had a chance to speak yet. It is something that can wait to the end, so I would defer that we finish the stack, and then I'll be glad to put that in at the end.
Okay,
Janice,
you go.
Go ahead.
If you're sure,
Janice?
David. Okay. I live in Southern Ontario, right in a region right beside Toronto. And I have 2 nuclear generations in my area. My family's been here a long time. I didn't move here. Oh boy, let me live near 2 nuclear generating stations. The Pickering one is it's the oldest in Canada, one of the oldest in the world. And the Darlington one is being refurbished. And my thought was, well, this will go on, things will go well. During the pandemic, I lucked upon Professor Mark Jacobson's amazing work of how we don't need nuclear or fossil fuels to go into the future, and he has it all plotted out. And what happened is that we got a conservative government. It seems in Canada, both the federal and provincial governments are pro-nuclear, basically. And so what happened when we got this conservative government in Ontario is all of a sudden, thanks to Professor Mark Winfield at York University in Toronto, who said that the government doesn't really have a plan. They just kind of handed it over. They've handed it over to the nuclear industry. So the plan, according to Professor Winfield, the Ontario government plans to spend $100 billion on nuclear. I thought we were going to get out of this business and go solar and renewable and everything. And so what has also gone on is there's a bill, C-59, that went through the federal government, and it had to do with not allowing people to give false information, misinformation. And we had something called the Pathways Alliance in Canada, which is, I think, the 6 biggest oil companies in the world or whatever, working in the oil sands. And they had all this propaganda on TV and, by 50-50, we're going to be all wonderful. And anyway, when this bill C-59 went through, they closed everything down. Like they shut it down like that. And I was on a webinar with Dr. Gordon Edwards, who is with the Coalition of Canadian for Nuclear Responsibility. And I sort of put in the chat, could we not use that Bill C-59 to go after the propaganda of the nuclear industry? And I found out later that actually a number of NGOs, including the Sierra Club in Canada, had actually done that. And what happened was it's a Bureau of Competition, Cartels, and Deceptive Marketing branch. And the person who got it just shut them down. They said, oh, you're just trying to do propaganda and influence politicians and sort of go for renewables instead, whatever. What I'm trying to say is that basically, you mentioned, Stephanie, your comment about what's it going to take for people to wake up? I feel where I live, right beside Toronto, the Pickering station is I can't imagine how much plutonium's there because it's the oldest station in Canada, that people aren't more worried about this. But it's like I mean, there's 700,000 people about here in this region where I live, right beside Toronto, and they're completely oblivious to this. It's like, as you said, how do you wake people up? And I think it has to do with the propaganda. I mean, all you hear is clean. In the 70s, it was too cheap to measure. It's clean, it's green. I hear this spouted by the Ontario finance minister on TV. And so, I mean, I think it's a big thing. And
yeah, so like if I was at a recently at a neighbor's house for dinner, and her meeting her grown children who were the early 20s, and they were so surprised, and they were on the, you know, doing things to help recycling and everything like that. They were really surprised when I started speaking against nuclear energy. And there was another guy our age at the table who said, oh, my, you know, he had protested Seabrook, and so our generation understands, you know, like liberals in our generation pretty much understand. Some of them have changed and have gone into swallowed all this hype. But there's this whole new generations of people who haven't lived through these accidents, who have just been fed this hype since they were teenagers, and who are seriously concerned global warming is the biggest issue. And so anything that you throw at it, they just swallow it, but they don't know. And there's nothing to counter it that's been able that can reach them, you know? So, and by the way, you know, we talk about the Society of Professional Journalists. That's an avenue, but they get all their news through, they don't watch TV shows. They don't read mainstream newspapers. They kind of like, I don't know, get their news through various social media outlets where it's a different ballgame. I don't know. I haven't spent enough time just trying to analyze how to get to those kind of people.
I also just remembered that the group that brought this mostly legislation forward, which I didn't know till I watched a webinar yesterday, was CAPE. It's the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. They're the ones that brought this legislation forward. And it's just very frustrating that you know, this is going on, that people don't seem to understand how dangerous this is. And I don't know, that's anyway, I just
that's very surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, NEIS, for another mind-blowing night with the experts.
Thank you.
And we do have to pay attention to the fact that it's now 8 minutes to 9, and we are almost 2 hours into this. And the stack is still long. Lori Johnston was going to be next, and then Michelle, and then Jake. So, and then there's 3 more. Elizabeth, some German name, Reibeschlager, and John Shields. And I really wanted to call on Mickey Marique. I don't think we're going to have time for all this.
Well, let's just ask Stephanie, what's your situation on time?
Well, it's almost 10 o'clock, and I actually didn't have a chance to eat dinner.
Oh, yeah.
So I won't be able to stay too much longer, but if we I wasn't expecting it to go on to go on for this. I'd love to hear from everybody, but maybe if everybody said what they had to say in a very short way. I'm
Tighten it up, folks. Tighten it up, folks.
Okay, so I don't see Lori Johnston still here, but oh yes, there she is. Lori, can you unmute and ask the question you had in mind, or do you want to skip it? Lori? Okay, we're just going to go straight to Michelle, and then if Lori wants to come back, we'll call on her next. But Michelle, you're next.
Yeah, just very short point. You know, there things are going to be changing within the next couple of months in the U.S. at least. So that's will be interesting. But whatever and however things settle out, you're going to have a huge turnover in the federal government, particularly among staffers. And I would say, based on experience I had coming into this after 9/11, is that's where a very important target is the new staffers that come in, that have a brief window of opportunity where they're interested in learning about stuff, and where you can establish a relationship with them, which can't be one started by lecturing them. It has to be by outreach, by expressing an interest, by setting up a meeting with small groups of people, Zoom, and just beginning relationships and building trust. So like the world is chaos and horrible and about to all blow up, but we've been there before, and sometimes the sands shift. So a little bit of hopeful point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And it looks like Lori has unmuted herself. So Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pass it and I thank you all for sharing.
And that's it? She
Yes,
said
thank you. Talk to you all later.
Thank you all for sharing. And Lori, thank you very much for that comment. So Jake is next. Go ahead, Jake. Unmute. Are you there, Jake? You got your hand up.
Let's move on to the next person. We can double for Jake.
Okay, Jake, we'll come back to you. Mary Beth, go ahead, please. But, oh, well, Elizabeth was next, but that's okay. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Oh, thank you. Stephanie, you're one of my heroines. I appreciate you so much being out there in the thick of it and giving us the real data, despite needing to act like you weren't realizing how ridiculous this industry is. I wanted to put out that we are facilitating people throughout the movement to get together and collaborate. I think that that's one way we can move things forward, is to break through the silo situation and link more with the anti-weapons people and all of our fractured bits of activism. So I just wanted to let you know that that's going on. Our impact campaign team that we've been able to hire to help us with our film, SOS, the San Onofre Syndrome, Nuclear Power's Legacy. They know how to do this on social media, which I have to say I don't know about and I don't want to know about. Yeah. But it is a way for us to all collaborate. So I'm going to put my email in the list here, and if anybody wants to join in on that effort, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this is a very generous offer that comes from Mocha Media, who and Lisa Smithline is the person who has done the publicity for Mary Beth and James Heddle's film. So we've only our speaker only wants to go for 3 more minutes, and we've got Jake, Elizabeth Ribe on the list, John Shields, and Mickey Marique.
I would suggest, Jan, if I could suggest,
please.
Those of you who still have questions, write them in the chat, and we will forward those questions to Stephanie, and we can respond that way. That way you'll get a response, but we won't take the time tonight to do it.
Yeah, I really think we need to let the speaker go. And as Lee said, bon appetit.
Thank you. Okay. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jan and David and everyone here. Just really a great evening and so much to think about. And it's heartening to hear about you've actually got some things going with social media, Mary Beth, and that's terrific. Yeah, we can't get totally despondent. And I like the idea of hooking up with anti-nuclear weapons. I met some of those people doing my book at Pantex, around Pantex, and it was fascinating. That was in the late 90s, though. And these women, they were fantastic. They were all like conservative Republicans who had made links in Washington with Democrats, and also had made links with similar groups in Russia. And there was this global activism. I don't know if you're hooked into that, Mary Beth, but that really just heartened me that this was going on. But they also ran into problems in Texas because in this tiny community, because so many people's livelihoods were dependent on working at
Yeah.
factories.
Yeah,
So,
that's a problem.
boy, talk about being on the front lines. It was tough.
Right. I love those people. We've been there too, to
Oh.
Pantex. Yeah.
And I don't know if you heard about the famous church in Our Lady of the Fields. At one point it was burnt to the ground. It was very sad because that has a real history in that community. And there was some thought that there were people protesting, that the people were going to Washington to protest Pantex. So I don't know if that was relayed, but it was very sad. But no, they were great. They were just a great bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry we didn't get to you, Jake. If you want to send me your question, I'll be glad to send it on to Stephanie, or anyway, we do have to close down because it is 10 o'clock where Stephanie is. So I'm going to turn this back to Dave to close out the meeting.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for, as we said, it was going to be a lively conversational type evening, and I think we succeeded in that.
Yep.
And we really hope that those of you who came also really got a lot out of it. You will be receiving an email with the chat, and it is just loaded with links and information and things you can do. So we hope you take advantage of that. A reminder again that next month we're going to be doing this a week early on the 24th, 7 o'clock Central Time. And we look forward to having you here and invite you to invite other people. That's how we make this happen, and we'll continue to grow it as much as possible. One thing I'll plant the last seed on is we're approaching the end of the year. We're not going to be doing a December event because of the holidays. But if you shoot us an email at NEIS with ideas of speakers or topics you would like us to cover, that would be very helpful in us putting together the agenda for 2025. So again, I want to thank you, Stephanie, very, very much for enduring hunger. I'm sure you won't relieve it with caviar.
No.
But we hope to have you back again
Yeah.
soon. Wish you every great fortune as you move forward. So
thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. It was a great evening. It was wonderful.
And
Thanks.
and I do have a parting shot. Please look up the book Petroleum 238.
I love it.
Yeah, because it's a story of how the fossil fuel industry creates deadly radiation, and he's going to be our speaker.
Well, that and Atomic Bamboozle and also SOS, I'm really excited to see all that. I'm really looking forward to it. Great. Thank you.
Sorry, Dave.
Thanks.
all right, thank you all. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Watch the comet.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Al.
Bye.